Millionaire abandoned his pregnant wife.
Father,
25 years later, he applied for a loan and found his daughter as the bank manager. Hi, my beautiful family. First, let me pray for you. Dear Lord, bless my family with peace, with strength to overcome every trial, and with joy that never fades. Heal their broken places, restore their hope, and surround them with true love every single day. Amen. Now let me speak from my heart. I know many of you who come here for the first time carry trust issues. You wonder, is this channel real? Is this man truly speaking with love? I understand your heart, because in today's world, trust is broken so easily. But my beautiful family, let me tell you, every story I create is born out of love, tears, and sacrifice. I don't do this for myself, I do it for you. Still, it breaks me when many of you don't watch the story till the end. Do you know what it feels like? It feels like my hard work, my sleepless nights, my love for you mean nothing. If your heart is true, write present. If your love is real, write I am with Mr. Peter. To my new family members, give me your trust, and I will never break it. Walk with me through the end of every story, and you will see it was worth your time, worth your heart, worth your belief. And don't forget, because I listened to my family, I created a new channel, Mr. Peter Family, where I will share shorter videos under 1 hour just for you. You can find the link in my community post. Some prisons are built with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, but they cage the soul just as cruelly as iron bars. Temperance Hill stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Belle Meade mansion, watching autumn leaves dance across manicured lawns that stretched like a green ocean toward Nashville's distant skyline. At 23, she possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that stopped conversations in crowded rooms, honey-colored hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, eyes the shade of Tennessee whiskey, and a spirit that had once burned bright enough to illuminate the darkest corners of any room. Now, 3 years into her marriage to Pearlie Hawkins, that light flickered like a candle in a storm. The grandfather clock in the marble foyer chimed 11 times, its resonant tones echoing through rooms so grand they could have housed entire families, yet felt empty enough to swallow her whole. Temperance pressed her palm against the cool glass, leaving a ghostly handprint that would disappear within moments, much like her former self had vanished into this gilded cage. Her literature classroom at Vanderbilt University seemed like another lifetime now, though she still taught 3 days a week. Pearlie allowed her this small freedom, not from generosity, but because a professor wife enhanced his carefully crafted image as Nashville's most cultured music mogul. My wife, the intellectual, he would introduce her at society gatherings, his hand possessing her waist like a prize he'd won at auction. The sound of Italian leather shoes against marble announced his arrival before she saw his reflection in the window. Pearlie Hawkins, at 35, commanded attention the way lightning draws the eye during thunderstorms. His empire, built from nothing but raw ambition and ruthless calculation, had grown to $60 million through acquiring struggling music companies and transforming them into profit machines. He possessed the kind of dangerous charisma that made lesser men step aside and women forget their own names. But Temperance had learned to read the predator behind those piercing blue eyes. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, he announced, straightening gold cufflinks that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a year. Remember what we discussed about tonight? Tonight, the Nashville Music Industry Awards Gala, where 500 of the city's most powerful people would gather to celebrate success while secretly measuring each other's worth. Temperance's role was precisely choreographed. Smile beautifully, speak only when spoken to, and never, ever express opinions that might reflect poorly on her husband's empire. "Of course," she murmured, though rebellion stirred in her chest like a caged bird desperate for flight. Pearlie's first marriage to Catelyn Kelsey had ended in spectacular divorce after 5 barren years. The society pages had buzzed with whispered speculation about fertility treatments, desperate attempts at conception, and finally, Catalin's dramatic departure with half his assets. When Pearlie met Temperance at a university fundraiser, he'd seen not a brilliant young professor, but a vessel for his legacy, someone whose gentle nature and proven intellect suggested she might succeed where his first wife had failed. Their courtship had been a masterclass in calculated romance. Flowers arrived daily, each bouquet more extravagant than the last. Private jets swept her to Paris for weekend getaways, Broadway shows in New York, and dinners at restaurants where reservations required months of planning. He'd woven her into his world so gradually that she hadn't noticed the threads becoming chains until after the wedding, when the golden cage door clicked shut. "Doctor, Patterson confirmed your appointment tomorrow," Pearlie said, adjusting his platinum watch with the precision of a man who controlled every minute of every day. "He said your cycle indicates optimal timing." Temperance's stomach clenched. 3 years of marriage reduced to clinical discussions of ovulation schedules, basal temperatures, and strategic intimacy. Romance had died under the weight of reproductive calculations, replaced by monthly disappointments that sent Pearlie's jaw tightening with barely controlled frustration. "Perhaps we could discuss something else," she suggested, her voice soft but steady. "I've been reading about the literacy program downtown. They need volunteers to—" Temperance. Her name on his lips carried the sharp edge of warning. "We've discussed this. Your energy should be focused on our future family, not playing teacher to illiterate adults who should have learned to read in childhood." The dismissal stung, but not as much as the casual cruelty underneath it. Pearlie viewed compassion as weakness, charity as foolishness. He'd clawed his way from a trailer park childhood through sheer determination and ruthless ambition, leaving behind everyone who couldn't keep pace. In his world, the strong devoured the weak, and showing mercy was tantamount to offering your throat to wolves. But Temperance continued volunteering at the literacy center anyway, during stolen hours when Pearlie believed she was shopping or at the salon. She'd discovered that helping struggling adults learn to read gave her purpose beyond being a decorative wife and potential mother. These sessions, hidden from her husband, were the only times she felt like herself anymore. "The Kellermans will be at the gala tonight," Pearlie continued, straightening his black tie with military precision. "Robert's considering selling his publishing company. I want you to be particularly charming to his wife. She influences his business decisions more than he admits." Temperance nodded, though her mind wandered to her grandmother's worn hands, teaching her to read by lamplight in their tiny apartment above the Nashville diner. Grammy Hill had survived the Depression by being resourceful and kind, two qualities that Pearlie viewed as antiquated weaknesses in modern society. "Kindness is its own form of strength, baby girl," Grammy had whispered during their final conversation before cancer claimed her gentle voice. "Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Those words sustained Temperance through 3 years of watching her husband destroy smaller companies without conscience, turning family businesses into corporate acquisitions. She'd learned to hide her horror behind carefully practiced smiles, to swallow protests that might embarrass him publicly, to become the perfect trophy wife who enhanced his reputation without challenging his methods. The doorbell's melodic chimes announced their driver's arrival. Pearlie's limousine waited in the circular driveway, its black exterior gleaming under strategically placed landscape lighting. As they descended the mansion's sweeping staircase, Temperance caught her reflection in the hallway's antique mirror, a woman dressed in designer silk and diamonds, looking every inch the successful mogul's wife, but with eyes that held shadows deeper than Tennessee mountain caves. "Remember," Pearlie murmured as they stepped into the autumn evening, "we're not just attending a party tonight, we're building an empire." As Nashville's glittering skyline rose before them through the limousine's tinted windows, Temperance touched her flat stomach and whispered a secret prayer to whatever gods protected desperate women. If a child was what it took to earn Pearlie's love, then she would give him that gift. Perhaps motherhood would soften his sharp edges, help him remember that power meant nothing without someone to share it with. The ultrasound appointment card hidden in her jewelry box seemed to burn with possibility. Tomorrow she would learn if her prayers had been answered, if the faint nausea and tender breasts meant that their 3-year struggle might finally end. But as Nashville's lights blurred past like fallen stars, Temperance couldn't shake the feeling that her life balanced on a knife's edge, and that tomorrow's revelation would either save her marriage or shatter it completely. She had no way of knowing that within 6 weeks she would be standing in freezing rain with nowhere to go, learning that some prayers are answered in ways that destroy us before they deliver salvation. Chapter 2. The Storm Breaks. Nashville, Tennessee, November 1999. There are moments when time fractures like glass, and everything you believed about your life lies in sharp, irreparable pieces at your feet. The ultrasound screen glowed with ghostly images that would forever divide Temperance's existence into before and after. Dr. Gertie Walker, her gentle physician with silver hair and grandmother's hands, smiled with the joy of someone delivering miraculous news. "Congratulations, Temperance. You're 14 weeks along and you're having a beautiful, healthy daughter." A daughter. The word hung in the sterile air of the examination room like a benediction or a curse, depending on whose ears received it. Temperance felt her heart expand with overwhelming love for the tiny life growing inside her, a precious girl who would inherit her grandmother's strength and, God willing, her father's determination without his cruelty. But beside her, Pearlie's silence stretched thin as winter ice about to crack. "Are you absolutely certain?" His voice carried the dangerous quiet that preceded earthquakes. "Perhaps it's too early to determine gender accurately." Dr. Walker, bless her innocent soul, beamed with professional confidence. "Oh no, Mr. Hawkins, I'm quite certain. See here?" She pointed to shadows on the screen that meant everything and nothing simultaneously. "Your daughter is developing perfectly. Her heartbeat is strong. Her measurements are right on schedule. She's going to be a fighter, this one." Temperance watched her husband's reflection in the dark window, saw his jaw clench with the precision of a steel trap closing. 3 years of marriage had taught her to read his moods like weather patterns, and the storm building behind his eyes promised devastation. "Could you give us a moment alone, Doctor?" Pearlie's request sounded perfectly reasonable to anyone who didn't know him, but Temperance recognized the command beneath silk politeness. As Dr. Walker gathered her charts and bustled from the room, Temperance's hands instinctively moved to protect her belly. The ultrasound gel felt cold against her skin, but not as cold as the expression settling across her husband's aristocratic features. 3 years, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years of specialists, fertility treatments, perfectly timed attempts. 3 years of my life wasted on producing this. "Pearlie, please," Temperance began, but he silenced her with a look that could have frozen Nashville's Cumberland River. "Do you understand what this means?" He stood abruptly, his 6-foot frame suddenly seeming massive in the small room. "Everything I've built, every company I've acquired, every enemy I've crushed to get where I am, it all dies with me. A daughter will take some other man's name, give my fortune to his children, scatter my legacy to the winds like dust." Temperance pushed herself upright on the examination table, still clutching the paper gown around her exposed body. "She's our child, Pearlie, our flesh and blood. How can you speak about her like she's worthless?" His laugh held no humor, only bitter recognition of life's cruelest joke. "Worthless. She's worse than worthless. She's a mockery. After everything I've sacrificed, after clawing my way up from nothing, fate gives me a daughter who'll hand my empire to strangers." The ride home through Nashville's increasingly grey November afternoon passed in deadly silence. Temperance pressed her face against the limousine's window, watching other families go about their normal lives. Fathers pushing strollers, couples holding hands, children playing in yards surrounded by white picket fences. Her own reflection stared back like a ghost trapped between two worlds, and she wondered if any of those happy families had been built on foundations of love rather than ambition. Their Belmead mansion loomed ahead like a mausoleum, its pristine facade hiding the decay eating away at its heart. Pearlie hadn't spoken since leaving Dr. Walker's office, but she could feel his rage building like pressure in a steam engine about to explode. The marble foyer echoed with the sound of their footsteps, his sharp and decisive, hers hesitant and fearful. Outside, November wind rattled windows like skeleton fingers, and dark clouds gathered with the promise of Tennessee's first winter storm. "Pack your things," Pearlie said suddenly, his words dropping into the silence like stones into still water. Temperance stopped halfway up the grand staircase, her hand gripping the polished banister. "What did you say?" "You heard me." He loosened his tie with violent precision. "Pack your belongings and get out of my house. You and that mistake are no longer welcome here." The world tilted sideways. Temperance gripped the railing harder, afraid she might fall. "You can't be serious. This is our home, our marriage." "This was our marriage when I believed you could give me a son." Pearlie's voice exploded through the house like thunder. "Now I discover you're as useless as my first wife. 3 years wasted on another barren woman who can't produce what matters." "I'm not barren." Temperance descended the stairs, her voice strengthening with desperate courage. "I'm pregnant with your child, a beautiful daughter who deserves better than your cruelty." Pearlie's face twisted with contempt. "A daughter is worse than nothing. At least childlessness leaves possibilities. A daughter is nature's way of telling me I've failed." He climbed toward her, each step bringing him closer like approaching thunder. "Do you know what I had to do to build this empire? What I sacrificed, what I destroyed, who I crushed? I did it all so my son would inherit something magnificent, something worthy of the Hawkins name. The baby I'm carrying will be a Hawkins too. No." The single word cut through her protest like a blade. "She'll be nothing but a disappointment I can't afford to claim." At the top of the staircase, he grabbed her Louis Vuitton suitcase from their walk-in closet and began throwing her belongings inside, with no regard for the delicate fabrics or carefully arranged jewelry. Silk blouses landed in crumpled heaps, cashmere sweaters tangled with costume pearls, designer shoes scattered like abandoned dreams. "Pearlie, please think about what you're doing," Temperance begged, following him around their bedroom. "I love you. This baby was created from love." "Love?" He spun around so quickly she stumbled backward. "You think love has anything to do with marriage at our level? Marriage is strategy, Temperance. It's about building dynasties, creating legacies, ensuring survival through superior offspring. Love is a luxury for people who can't afford better reasons to stay together." He snapped the suitcase shut and threw it down the marble staircase, where it bounced and skidded before coming to rest against the front door like a wounded animal. "There. Everything you brought to this marriage. Now leave." "Where am I supposed to go?" Her voice broke on the question. "I have nowhere, no family, no money of my own. Should have thought of that before failing to produce what I needed." His blue eyes, once capable of making her forget her own name with desire, now held all the warmth of Arctic ice. "Maybe your literacy friends downtown can find you a shelter. I'm sure they're experts at helping society's failures." The casual cruelty of bringing up her secret volunteer work felt like being slapped. Temperance touched her still flat stomach, where their daughter grew blissfully unaware of the rejection awaiting her arrival. "This is your child too," she whispered. "How can you abandon your own flesh and blood?" "Because flesh and blood mean nothing without purpose." Pearlie grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight enough to bruise. "I came from nothing, Temperance. A trailer park where dreams went to die, where my mother cleaned rich people's houses while my father drank away his disability checks. I swore I'd build something eternal, something that would outlast my miserable childhood." His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "A daughter destroys that dream. She'll take another man's name, have his children, and everything I've built becomes a footnote in some other family's history." Thunder rolled across Nashville like bowling balls in heaven's alleys, and rain began pelting windows with increasing fury. Pearlie released her shoulders and walked to their bedroom's French doors, staring out at the storm as if it reflected his inner turmoil. "Get out," he said, without turning around. "Take your suitcase and your mistake and find somewhere else to ruin. I never want to see either of you again." "And if I refuse?" Temperance asked, though she already knew the answer. He faced her then, and she saw something in his expression that terrified her more than anger, complete and utter indifference, as if she'd already ceased to exist in his world. "Then I'll call security and have you removed as a trespasser. Is that really how you want this to end?" Outside, November rain transformed from gentle pattering to aggressive downpour, as if the sky itself wept for what was being destroyed in this marble palace that had never truly been a home. Temperance gathered what remained of her dignity, wrapped her coat around her trembling shoulders, and walked downstairs to collect her scattered life. At the front door, she turned back one final time. Pearlie stood at the top of the staircase like a king surveying his domain, untouchable and unmoved by her tears. "She would have loved you," Temperance said quietly. "Our daughter would have been proud to carry your name, proud to continue your legacy. You're throwing away the greatest gift you'll ever receive." "I'm throwing away 3 years of failure," he replied. "Nothing more." As she stepped into the November storm, leaving behind everything she'd thought she wanted, Temperance couldn't know that she was also stepping toward something she truly needed. A love that would choose her daily, a man who would see daughters as treasures rather than disappointments, and a family built on foundation of devotion rather than dynasty. But first, she had to survive the storm. Chapter 3. The Angel's Rescue, Nashville, Tennessee, late November 1999. Sometimes angels arrive wearing ordinary clothes and driving practical cars, proving that miracles rarely announce themselves with trumpets and golden light. Freeman Cole adjusted his windshield wipers against the November sleet that turned Nashville's streets into rivers of grey despair. At 40 years old, he possessed the quiet strength of someone who had weathered life's storms without becoming bitter, though the past 2 years had tested that resilience in ways he'd never imagined possible. Emma's battle with cancer had taught him that tragedy could strike the gentlest hearts, but losing her had also revealed his capacity for finding meaning in helping others heal. As branch manager of Tennessee Trust Bank, Freeman could have chosen the shortest route home to his modest Green Hills house, but tonight he'd decided to drive through downtown, past the literacy center where he volunteered twice weekly. Teaching adults to read had become his way of honoring Emma's memory. She'd been a librarian who believed every person deserved access to the magic hidden between book covers. The bus stop on Fifth Avenue appeared deserted in the swirling precipitation, but something made him slow down for a closer look. What he initially mistook for discarded clothing shifted slightly, revealing the outline of a woman huddled against the shelter's back wall. Her expensive coat, now soaked through and clinging to her shivering frame, suggested she wasn't Nashville's typical homeless population, but desperation recognized no social boundaries. Freeman pulled his sensible Honda Accord to the curb and stepped into the freezing rain without hesitation. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe early 20s, with honey-colored hair plastered against pale cheeks that held the translucent quality of someone teetering on the edge of hypothermia. Her hands, still wearing what appeared to be a wedding ring, pressed protectively against her rounded belly. "Ma'am?" His voice carried the gentle authority of someone accustomed to helping people through crisis. "Ma'am, you can't stay out here in this weather." Temperance lifted her head with tremendous effort, her Tennessee whiskey eyes struggling to focus. Through chattering teeth, she managed, I'm fine, just waiting for the next bus." "The buses stopped running an hour ago due to weather conditions," Freeman said kindly, crouching beside her despite the icy water soaking through his dress pants. "And you're not fine. You're in danger of frostbite. When did you eat last?" The question seemed to confuse her, as if the concept of food had become foreign. "I don't. Yesterday, maybe. I can't remember." Freeman's protective instincts, honed by years of marriage to a woman who collected strays like other people collected stamps, kicked into overdrive. "I'm Freeman Cole. I work at Tennessee Trust Bank, and I volunteer at the Downtown Literacy Center. I'd like to help you, if you'll let me." Something in his tone, perhaps its complete absence of judgment or agenda, caused Temperance's carefully maintained composure to crack. "I don't have anywhere to go," she whispered, her voice breaking like ice in spring thaw. "My husband, he threw me out, because of the baby, because she's not what he wanted." Freeman absorbed this information without visible reaction, though his jaw tightened slightly. He'd seen enough domestic situations through his banking work to recognize the signs of emotional abuse, and something about this young woman's refined manner of speaking suggested she'd fallen from considerable heights. "Well then," he said, with the decisive gentleness that had made him successful at managing both difficult customers and grieving widowers, "you'll come home with me. My house isn't fancy, but it's warm and dry, and I make excellent grilled cheese sandwiches." "I couldn't possibly," Temperance began, but Freeman was already helping her stand on unsteady legs. "My wife Emma used to say that when God sends someone who needs help, he's really sending someone to help us," he said, supporting her weight as they walked toward his car. "She's been gone 2 years now, and I'm thinking maybe she sent you tonight." The drive to Freeman's Green Hills neighborhood gave Temperance her first glimpse of Nashville through different eyes. Instead of the power-hungry sharks circling Belle Meade mansions, she saw working families preparing for Thanksgiving in modest homes glowing with warm light. Freeman's steady presence behind the steering wheel radiated the kind of security she'd forgotten existed, protection offered without conditions or calculations. "Tell me about her," Freeman said quietly, nodding toward her belly. "Your daughter." Temperance's hands moved instinctively to her stomach. "She's due in December. The doctor says she's healthy, strong. Her father ... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence without crying. "Her father is missing out on something extraordinary," Freeman said simply. "Any man who would abandon his child doesn't deserve the title of father." His modest ranch house sat on a tree-lined street where neighbors still waved to each other and children's bicycles decorated front yards. Inside, Emma's presence lingered everywhere, in the hand-stitched quilts draped over comfortable furniture, the collection of books that filled every available wall space, and the subtle fragrance of lavender sachets tucked into couch cushions. "Emma loved to garden," Freeman explained, helping Temperance out of her soaked coat. "She said flowers proved that beautiful things could grow from dirt if you gave them enough love and patience." The living room's fieldstone fireplace crackled with warmth that had nothing to do with the burning logs. Family photographs covered the mantel, Freeman and a petite brunette woman with kind eyes at various stages of their marriage. Wedding pictures showing two people genuinely delighted to have found each other. Vacation snapshots revealing shared laughter and inside jokes. Hospital photos where Emma's radiant smile persisted despite chemotherapy's ravages. "She was beautiful," Temperance said, studying a photo of Emma reading to children at what appeared to be a library story time. "Inside and out," Freeman agreed, disappearing into the kitchen. "She'd be lecturing me right now about getting you into dry clothes before you catch pneumonia." He returned with one of Emma's thick terry-cloth robes and a pair of warm socks. "Guest bathrooms down the hall. Take as long as you need for a hot shower. I'll make us something to eat." Under the bathroom's bright lights, Temperance saw herself clearly for the first time in days. Dark circles ringed her eyes, her lips held a bluish tinge from prolonged cold exposure, and her pregnancy was beginning to show despite her small frame. She looked like exactly what she was, a desperate woman with nowhere else to turn. The hot water felt like liquid salvation against her chilled skin. Emma's shampoo smelled like gardenias and gentle dreams, and the thick robe wrapped around her like a maternal embrace. When she emerged 20 minutes later, the kitchen held aromas that made her stomach clench with sudden hunger. Freeman had prepared a feast by humble standards: grilled cheese sandwiches with golden crusts, homemade tomato soup that tasted like summer memories, and a glass of milk that he'd warmed with honey and vanilla. "Emma's recipe," he explained, setting the meal before her with the care of someone serving royalty. "I don't understand why you're helping me," Temperance said between grateful bites. "You don't know anything about me. I could be dangerous or crazy or—" "Are you dangerous?" Freeman asked with gentle humor, settling into the chair across from her with his own sandwich. "No." "Are you crazy?" "Sometimes I wonder," she admitted, surprising herself with honesty. 3 years married to someone who saw me as breeding stock might have affected my judgment. Freeman's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "What's your name, honey?" "Temperance. Temperance Hill." She didn't offer her married name, couldn't bear to claim connection to someone who'd discarded her so cruelly. "Well, Temperance Hill, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The guest room has everything you'll require, and I work standard banking hours if you need privacy during the day." "I can't accept charity," she began, but he held up one weathered hand. "It's not charity when both people benefit. This house has been too quiet since Emma died. Maybe your little girl needs to hear laughter bouncing off these walls again." That night, lying in Emma's carefully prepared guest room surrounded by handmade quilts and the lingering scent of lavender, Temperance felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: safety. Through the thin walls, she could hear Freeman moving around the house with quiet consideration, avoiding noise that might disturb her rest. For the first time in 3 years of marriage, she slept peacefully without fear of criticism, without calculating her words, without walking on eggshells around someone else's fragile ego. Her daughter seemed to sense this newfound security, kicking gently as if to say, "Finally, Mama, finally we're safe." Freeman Cole, reading in his bedroom by lamplight, whispered a prayer of gratitude to his departed wife. "I think you sent her, Emma. I think you knew I needed someone to protect and she needed someone to trust. Thank you for always knowing what I needed before I did." Outside, November rain continued falling on Nashville, but inside a modest Green Hills home, 2 broken hearts began the slow process of healing, not through romantic love, but through something deeper and more sustainable, the recognition that family could be chosen as well as born, and that sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as the heaviest burdens. Neither of them knew that in just 3 weeks their quiet sanctuary would fill with the cries of a newborn daughter who would prove that love multiplies rather than divides, and that the most precious treasures often arrive during the darkest storms. Chapter 4. A Warrior is Born, Nashville, Tennessee, December 15th, 1999. Some children enter the world gently, like whispered prayers answered in candlelight, but others arrive with the fierce determination of warriors claiming their rightful kingdom. The blizzard that struck Nashville in the early hours of December 15th descended like divine intervention, blanketing the city in pristine white that muffled sound and transformed familiar landscapes into something magical. Inside Freeman Cole's warm Green Hills home, Temperance woke to contractions that felt different from the practice squeezes that had been preparing her body for weeks. These rolled through her like thunder across Tennessee mountains, powerful, insistent, and impossible to ignore. Freeman. Her voice carried through the house with urgent clarity, though she tried to remain calm. At 37 weeks, the baby was still considered early, but Dr. Walker had assured her that December arrivals often proved to be perfectly healthy, just impatient to make their earthly debut. Freeman appeared in the guest room doorway within seconds, fully dressed despite the pre-dawn hour. His graying hair stood slightly askew, and his kind eyes showed immediate alertness that spoke to his protective nature. "How long?" he asked simply, moving to her side with the efficiency of someone who'd spent the last 3 weeks reading every pregnancy book the Nashville Public Library possessed. "Since about 3 this morning," Temperance panted through another contraction. "They're getting stronger, closer together. I think today is the day." Through the bedroom window, snow fell in thick curtains that blurred the familiar neighborhood into impressionist paintings. Freeman's practical Honda sat buried under 6 inches of accumulation, and the radio weatherman's voice drifted from the kitchen, announcing road closures and travel warnings throughout Davidson County. "The hospital might be a challenge in this weather," Freeman said gently, helping Temperance into her warmest clothes. "But we'll figure it out. That little girl picked quite a dramatic entrance." As if responding to his words, another contraction seized Temperance with breathtaking intensity. She gripped Freeman's steady hand, drawing strength from his unshakable calm. Over the past 3 weeks, this man had become her anchor in ways she'd never dared hope for in her marriage. He checked on her each morning before work, prepared nutritious meals tailored to her pregnancy needs, and spent evenings reading aloud from classic novels, creating a peaceful soundtrack for her daughter's final weeks in the womb. "The name," Temperance gasped as the contraction subsided. "I want to tell you the name before we leave for the hospital." Freeman gathered her overnight bag with methodical care, the one they'd packed together the previous week, filled with soft blankets, tiny clothes, and hope for a better future. "What is it, honey?" "Lavinia, after the Roman women who built empires through strength and intelligence." Temperance's voice grew stronger with conviction. "I want her to know she comes from warriors, even if her father couldn't see her worth." The drive to Vanderbilt Medical Center required 45 minutes instead of the usual 15. Freeman's Honda creeping through snow-covered streets where salt trucks struggled to keep ahead of the continuing precipitation. With each contraction, Temperance squeezed his free hand while he navigated icy intersections with the careful precision of someone carrying precious cargo. "Tell me about Emma again," she requested during one particularly intense wave of pain. Freeman's stories about his late wife had become her meditation during difficult moments, reminding her that love could be gentle, sustaining, and built on mutual respect rather than conquest. "Emma believed children were gifts that taught adults how to see wonder again," Freeman said, his voice warm despite the car's struggling heater. "She used to say that babies chose their parents, not the other way around. Maybe Lavinia chose you because she knew you'd raise her to be strong." The hospital's emergency entrance welcomed them with bright lights and professional efficiency. Nurses whisked Temperance into labor and delivery, while Freeman handled paperwork with the calm competence that had made him successful in banking, attention to detail, infinite patience, and genuine concern for others' well-being. "Are you the father?" asked a young resident, clipboard poised for insurance information. Freeman hesitated only briefly. "I'm family," he said simply, which felt more accurate than any biological relationship could have been. Labor progressed swiftly once they reached the delivery room. Dr. Walker arrived despite the weather conditions, her silver hair slightly disheveled, but her competent hands steady as she monitored both mother and baby. "This little one is eager to meet the world," she announced cheerfully. "Everything looks perfect, strong heartbeat, good position. You're doing beautifully, Temperance. Through the next several hours, Freeman never left Temperance's side. He held ice chips to her lips, wiped perspiration from her forehead, and whispered encouragement when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her determination. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he told her during the most difficult moments. "This baby is lucky to have you as her mother." The delivery room filled with tension as labor intensified. Outside, Nashville's blizzard continued with the kind of ferocity that shut down airports and sent sensible people searching for warmth and shelter. But inside the sterile safety of Vanderbilt Medical Center, 3 lives were about to intersect in ways that would reshape their understanding of what family could become. "I can see the head, Doctor," Walker announced with professional excitement. "One more big push, Temperance. Your daughter is almost here." At 11:47 p.m., as Nashville settled into winter silence, broken only by snowplows scraping asphalt, Lavinia Freeman made her entrance into the world. Her first cry pierced the delivery room like a battle hymn, not the mewling of typical newborns, but a sound that announced her arrival with authority and demanded attention from everyone present. "She's magnificent," Dr. Walker laughed, lifting the tiny, perfect human who had just changed everything. "Listen to those lungs. This child will never go unnoticed." Freeman's eyes filled with tears as the nurses placed Lavinia in Temperance's arms. 8 pounds, 2 ounces of pure miracle, with wispy hair the color of Tennessee honey and eyes that seemed to focus on her mother's face with unusual intensity. Her tiny fist closed around Freeman's offered finger with surprising strength, and something fundamental shifted in his heart, a door opening to let in love he'd never imagined possible. "Hello, baby girl," Temperance whispered, her voice thick with exhaustion and overwhelming joy. "Hello, my beautiful Lavinia. You're safe now. You're loved." But even in that moment of pure happiness, she felt the shadow of Pearlie's rejection. Their daughter was perfect, absolutely, completely perfect, and he had thrown them both away before even seeing her face. The injustice of it burned in her chest like swallowed fire, but she pushed the pain aside to focus on the miracle in her arms. Freeman seemed to read her thoughts with the intuition that had marked their friendship from the beginning. "He'll never know what he lost," he said quietly, stroking Lavinia's downy head with one gentle finger. "His loss is my gain. If he'd been a decent man, I wouldn't have had the privilege of being here for this moment." Through the hospital window, Nashville sparkled under its blanket of snow like a city made of diamonds. The blizzard had trapped most of the population indoors, creating a hushed world where miracles could unfold undisturbed by ordinary concerns. In this peaceful bubble, 3 people who'd found each other by chance were becoming a family by choice. "I want you to be her father," Temperance said suddenly, her words surprising even herself with their clarity and conviction. "Not just a friend or guardian, her real father in every way that matters. Will you do that, Freeman? Will you love her like she's your own?" Freeman's answer came without hesitation, as if he'd been waiting his entire 40 years to make this promise. "I already do love her like my own. From the moment she grabbed my finger, she became mine to protect. If you'll have me, I'd be honored to be Lavinia's father." As if understanding the significance of this moment, baby Lavinia opened her eyes, not the unfocused gaze of typical newborns, but a direct, intelligent stare that seemed to study each adult face with remarkable concentration. Those eyes held depth that suggested an old soul, someone who had arrived with purpose and would not be easily deterred from her chosen path. "She looks like she's planning something," Freeman observed with gentle humor, completely enchanted by his instant daughter. "She is," Temperance said with sudden, fierce certainty that surprised her with its intensity. "She's going to prove to the world that daughters are treasures, not disappointments. She's going to build something magnificent, something that would make any father proud to claim her. A sacred vow formed in her heart as she gazed at her perfect daughter, a promise that felt as binding as any spoken in churches or courtrooms. Someday, when Lavinia was old enough to understand, she would know the truth about her biological father's rejection. But she would also know that real fathers were made of love and dedication rather than shared DNA, and that Freeman Cole had chosen to be hers from the first moment he held her tiny hand. Dr. Walker completed her final examinations with the satisfied efficiency of someone who had delivered thousands of healthy babies, but even she seemed moved by the unusual family dynamic unfolding in room 302. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the strongest grip I've felt from a newborn in years, she announced. This little warrior is going to keep you both on your toes. As the medical team finished their protocols and prepared to move them to a recovery room, Temperance held her daughter close and whispered words that would echo through the decades ahead. One day, sweet girl, he'll realize what he threw away, and when that day comes, you'll be strong enough to show him exactly what he lost. The prophecy was spoken so quietly that only Lavinia could hear, but something in the baby's expression suggested she understood every word. Her tiny hand tightened around Freeman's finger as if sealing a pact, and her eyes remained open and alert as if she were already planning the remarkable life that stretched ahead. Outside, Nashville's blizzard continued painting the world in pristine white, erasing tire tracks and footprints to create a blank canvas for new beginnings. But inside the warmth of Vanderbilt Medical Center, a daughter had been born who would prove that love chosen daily was stronger than blood ties, that families forged by devotion could outlast empires built on ambition, and that the most devastating revenge was simply living well enough to make those who rejected you regret their blindness forever. In 25 years, that tiny fist would hold the power to destroy the man who had called her worthless. But tonight, she was simply a beloved baby girl, wrapped in blankets chosen by hands that would never let her fall. Chapter 5. Steel in the Making. Nashville, Tennessee, 2010 to 2017. There is a moment in every child's life when innocence dies and purpose is born. But few witness that transformation with such crystalline clarity. The morning of Lavinia's 10th birthday dawned with December sunshine streaming through the kitchen windows of the modest Green Hills home that had become her universe. Freeman stood at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes shaped like butterflies, a tradition he'd started when she turned 3 and insisted that breakfast should be as beautiful as everything else Daddy Freeman makes. At 49, he'd grown distinguished silver at his temples, but his eyes still held the same gentle warmth that had captivated a desperate pregnant woman 11 years earlier. 10 years old today, princess, he said, sliding a perfect stack onto her favorite plate, the one decorated with dancing horses that Emma had chosen during a long-ago shopping trip. Double digits. That means you're practically grown up. Lavinia, perched on the kitchen stool she'd occupied since she was tall enough to reach the counter, studied her father with the intense concentration that had marked her personality since infancy. Even as a small child, she possessed an uncanny ability to focus completely on whatever captured her interest, whether it was Freeman's bedtime stories, her piano lessons, or the complex jigsaw puzzles she could complete in half the time the box suggested. Daddy Freeman, she began carefully, her voice carrying the precise articulation that made her teachers comment on her unusual maturity. Why don't I look like you? The innocent question landed in the sunny kitchen like a dropped stone in still water, creating ripples that would change everything. Freeman's spatula paused midway to the griddle, and Temperance, now 33 and radiant with the contentment that comes from being genuinely loved, stopped arranging birthday presents on the counter. They had always known this day would come. Child development books warned that adopted children inevitably asked about their origins, but somehow they'd convinced themselves that Lavinia's obvious adoration for Freeman might postpone these difficult conversations indefinitely. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" Freeman said gently, setting down his cooking utensil and giving her his complete attention. Lavinia's amber eyes, so like her mother's but holding depths that seemed too ancient for her young face, moved between her parents with analytical precision. Sarah Morrison at school was talking about genetics during science class. She said children always look like their biological parents in some way, but I have Mama's eyes and hair, and nothing from you. Plus, I was born in December 1999, but you didn't marry Mama until I was 2 years old. I remember the wedding pictures. The child's logical mind had assembled facts like puzzle pieces, creating a picture that demanded explanation. Freeman and Temperance exchanged a look that communicated volumes. The moment they dreaded had arrived with typical Lavinia directness. "You're right to ask questions," Temperance said softly, moving to sit beside her daughter. "And you're old enough to know the truth. But it's a grown-up story with some sad parts. Are you sure you're ready?" Lavinia nodded with the solemnity of someone twice her age. "I want to know everything." That evening, after birthday cake had been consumed and presents opened with appropriate delight, the three of them gathered in Freeman's favorite spot, the living room where Emma's quilts still decorated the couch and family photographs chronicled their unconventional but unshakable bond. "Your biological father's name is Pearlie Hawkins," Temperance began, her voice steady despite the painful memories. "He's a wealthy businessman who owns many music companies in Nashville. When I was married to him, I thought love could change people, make them kinder and more patient." Lavinia listened with the intense focus she brought to everything important, asking occasional questions that revealed her sharp understanding of adult complexities. When Temperance described the ultrasound appointment and Pearlie's explosive reaction to learning he would have a daughter, something shifted behind Lavinia's young eyes, not tears, but a hardening that was almost visible. "He threw you out because I wasn't a boy." Her voice remained perfectly controlled, but her small hands clenched into fists. "He called you worthless because you were pregnant with me." "He was wrong about everything," Freeman interjected quickly, sensing dangerous territory. "Having you has been the greatest blessing of our lives. Some people are too broken to recognize gifts when they receive them." But Lavinia's brilliant mind was already racing ahead, connecting dots that perhaps should have remained separate for a few more years. "Where is he now? Does he know about me? Does he ever wonder what happened to us?" Temperance chose her words carefully. "He lives in a big mansion in Belle Meade and continues running his businesses. As far as I know, he's never asked about you or tried to find out how we're doing. In his mind, we stopped existing the day he threw us out." The room fell silent, except for the grandfather clock's steady ticking, the same clock that had marked time during Temperance's first desperate night in this house, when Freeman's kindness had seemed like impossible grace. "So he has all this money and power," Lavinia said slowly, "and he used it to hurt people who loved him. He destroyed his own family because he was disappointed." "Sweetheart," Freeman began, but Lavinia held up one small hand with startling authority. "No, Daddy Freeman, I need to understand this." Her voice carried a chilling maturity that made both adults exchange worried glances. "This man, my biological father, he thought daughters were worthless. He believed only sons could carry on his legacy. He was so wrong that he threw away his own child." She stood and walked to the window, her small silhouette outlined against the streetlights. "Well, he's going to learn exactly how wrong he was. I'm going to become everything he thought a son would be, but better. I'm going to prove that he made the biggest mistake of his life." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. This wasn't the natural curiosity of a child learning about her origins. This was something far more focused and potentially dangerous. "Lavinia, honey," Temperance said carefully, "it's natural to feel angry when you learn that someone rejected you, but building your life around proving a point to someone who doesn't deserve your energy—" "I'm not building my life around him," Lavinia interrupted with ice-cold precision. "I'm building my life despite him. There's a difference." From that December night forward, everything changed. The loving, cheerful child who had brought such joy to their unconventional family began transforming into something harder, more driven, and infinitely more determined to succeed. She still hugged Freeman goodnight and helped Temperance with dinner preparations. But underneath those familiar rituals, steel was forming where softness used to live. By sixth grade, Lavinia's teachers requested parent conferences not because she was struggling, but because her perfectionism had become almost aggressive. She didn't just complete assignments, she exceeded them so thoroughly that other students complained about the impossibly high standards she set. When she received a 98% on a mathematics test, she spent her recess calculating exactly where she'd lost those 2 points and how to prevent similar errors. "She's academically gifted beyond measure," her middle school principal told Freeman during a 7th grade meeting, "but I'm concerned about her social development. She seems to view relationships as strategic rather than genuine." Freeman saw what the educators meant. Lavinia had begun analyzing her classmates like chess pieces, identifying which friendships might prove useful and which were merely sentimental attachments that served no purpose. She joined student government, not from civic interest, but because leadership positions would look impressive on future applications. She volunteered at animal shelters because compassionate activities created positive character references. "Everything is calculated now," Freeman confided to Temperance one evening as they watched Lavinia practice piano with mechanical precision. "She's not playing because she enjoys music, she's building skills that might prove advantageous later." By high school, Lavinia had become a force of nature wrapped in a teenage girl's body. She mastered 4 languages, earned perfect SAT scores on her first attempt, and maintained a 4.0 GPA while participating in debate team, academic bowl, and volunteer programs that impressed college admissions officers. But her achievements felt hollow to the people who loved her, like watching someone build magnificent architecture with no intention of ever living inside. Her rare moments of genuine emotion came when discussing strategy. "Harvard, Yale, and Princeton are obvious choices," she explained during her junior year college planning session. "But Wharton has the best business program for what I need to accomplish. Their alumni network includes CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and the connections I make there will be invaluable." "What exactly are you trying to accomplish, sweetheart?" Freeman asked gently. "What's the end goal of all this preparation?" Lavinia's smile could have cut glass. "I'm going to build an empire that makes his look pathetic. Then I'm going to position myself as his only salvation and watch him realize what he threw away." The casual cruelty in her voice, so similar to stories Temperance had shared about Pearlie, sent chills down Freeman's spine. He was watching his beloved daughter transform into something that might eventually destroy not just her biological father, but herself in the process. On graduation night, as 17-year-old Lavinia delivered her valedictorian speech to Nashville's Hillsborough High School graduating class, her words rang with prophecy that terrified the 2 people who loved her most. "We live in a world that often underestimates what we're capable of achieving. People will try to define our worth based on their limited imagination, their prejudices, their failures of vision, but we have the power to prove them wrong. We have the ability to exceed every expectation, surpass every limitation, and show the world exactly what they failed to recognize." The audience applauded enthusiastically, but Freeman and Temperance sat in stunned silence. Their little girl, the baby who had entered the world during a blizzard with warrior cries, had just declared war on everyone who had ever doubted her worth. And sitting somewhere in Nashville's Belle Meade district, completely unaware that his abandoned daughter had just graduated with honors and deadly purpose, Pearlie Hawkins continued living his life in blissful ignorance of the storm, bearing his name that was about to reshape everything he thought he knew about family, legacy, and the true cost of throwing away love. Chapter 6. The Hunter's Education, Philadelphia and Nashville, 2017 to 2021. The finest predators are those who learn to hunt not with instinct alone, but with intelligence so refined it becomes indistinguishable from art. The Wharton School of Business rose from the University of Pennsylvania campus like a temple to ambition, its limestone walls having witnessed the education of titans who reshaped American industry. At 17, Lavinia Freeman Cole walked through those imposing doors carrying nothing but a full scholarship, a carefully curated identity that concealed her connection to Nashville's music empire and a hunger for knowledge that bordered on obsession. Her freshman dormitory room in the quadrangle could have been mistaken for a war room if anyone had bothered to look beneath her carefully maintained facade of typical college enthusiasm. While her roommate decorated walls with boy band posters and friendship photos, Lavinia created a sophisticated information network centered around a single target, understanding every aspect of Pearlie Hawkins' business empire. "You're really into music industry analysis," observed her roommate, Jessica Chen, a pleasant girl from California whose greatest concern was choosing between marketing and finance concentrations. "Are you planning to work in entertainment after graduation?" "Something like that," Lavinia replied with a smile that revealed nothing while appearing completely genuine. She'd perfected this expression during high school, learning to hide razor-sharp focus behind the appearance of normal teenage interests. Her academic schedule reflected strategic precision rather than intellectual curiosity. Corporate finance, business strategy, mergers and acquisitions, international business law, every course selection served her ultimate purpose. While classmates complained about demanding coursework, Lavinia absorbed complex theoretical frameworks like a scholar monk studying sacred texts. Professor Margaret Donovan, who taught advanced corporate strategy, noticed the unusual intensity that marked Lavinia's approach to business education. "Miss Freeman," she said, after one particularly impressive class presentation, "your analysis of hostile takeover strategies shows remarkable sophistication. Have you considered graduate school?" "I'm more interested in practical application," Lavinia replied politely. "Academic understanding is valuable, but I want to see how these principles work in real-world competitive environments." What Professor Donovan couldn't have known was that Lavinia spent her evenings conducting detailed research into Pearlie's acquisition patterns, mapping his business relationships, and identifying the strategies that had built his $60 million empire. She created comprehensive profiles of his key executives, documented his competitive methods, and analyzed every publicly available detail of his corporate structure. Her investigation revealed disturbing patterns that made her mother's stories about his personal cruelty seem almost mild compared to his professional devastation. Hawkins Entertainment had built its fortune by identifying struggling family businesses, offering seemingly generous buyout terms, then systematically destroying the company cultures that had made those businesses valuable in the first place. Former employees told stories of sudden layoffs, pension fund raids, and local communities left economically devastated after Pearlie extracted maximum value and moved to his next target. "He's not just ruthless in personal relationships," she wrote in her private journal during sophomore year. "He treats entire communities like expendable resources. This isn't about business success, it's about power for its own sake." During summer internships, Lavinia proved as brilliant at building strategic relationships as she was at academic analysis. Her professors recommended her for prestigious positions at Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, and other firms where she could observe high-stakes financial maneuvering firsthand. But rather than viewing these experiences as career preparation, she treated them as intelligence-gathering operations. At Goldman Sachs, she befriended senior analysts who had worked on deals involving music industry consolidation. At McKinsey, she assisted with consulting projects that gave her insight into corporate restructuring strategies. Each internship added layers to her understanding of how business empires could be built and how they could be destroyed. "Lavinia has extraordinary potential," wrote her Goldman Sachs supervisor in a performance review that would have guaranteed her a full-time offer. "She combines analytical brilliance with strategic thinking that's rare in someone her age. However, I sense she's focused on objectives beyond immediate career advancement. She seems to be preparing for something specific rather than exploring general opportunities." That something specific became clearer during her junior year when Lavinia began developing what she privately called the plan. It wasn't enough to simply outperform Pearlie in business. That would be a hollow victory that might never reach his attention. She needed to position herself as indispensable to his continued success, then reveal her identity at the moment when he needed her most. Her strategy required perfect timing, flawless execution, and intimate knowledge of his vulnerabilities. Through careful analysis of industry trends, she identified potential future challenges that could threaten his empire: changing music consumption patterns, streaming service competition, and demographic shifts that were reshaping the entertainment landscape. "He's built his success on acquiring traditional music companies," she noted in her strategic analysis. "But he's never adapted to digital transformation. His empire is like a magnificent castle built on a foundation that's slowly eroding. All it needs is the right pressure at the right moment." During senior year, Lavinia's professors began treating her less like a student and more like a colleague. Her senior thesis, titled "Strategic Vulnerabilities in Legacy Entertainment Conglomerates," became required reading in Professor Donovan's graduate seminars. The paper analyzed how traditional music industry giants could be destabilized by coordinated financial pressure, but anyone reading it carefully might have noticed that the theoretical case study bore striking similarities to Hawkins Entertainment's corporate structure. "Miss Freeman," Professor Donovan said during their final advisory meeting, "I've been teaching for 25 years, and I've never encountered a student with your particular combination of analytical ability and strategic focus. Whatever you're planning to do with that brilliant mind, I suspect it's going to be extraordinary." Lavinia's graduation in May 2021 was attended by Freeman and Temperance, who sat in the audience watching their daughter receive summa cum laude honors while feeling a mixture of pride and growing unease. At 21, she had become exactly what she'd set out to be: intellectually formidable, strategically sophisticated, and emotionally armored against anything that might distract her from her chosen mission. "I've been accepted to several excellent MBA programs," she announced at their graduation dinner, "but I think it's time to begin practical application of what I've learned." "What kind of practical application?" Freeman asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I'm moving back to Nashville," Lavinia said with the calm authority of someone announcing an inevitable historical event. "It's time to enter Pearlie Hawkins' world." Her parents' expressions reflected the fear they'd been carrying for years, watching someone they loved transform herself into a weapon designed for a single specific purpose. But they also recognized the futility of trying to dissuade her from a path she'd been walking since her 10th birthday. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Temperance asked quietly. "Building your life around proving a point to someone who's never deserved that much of your energy?" Lavinia's smile held no warmth, only the satisfaction of a chess master approaching checkmate. "I'm not building my life around him, Mama. I'm building my life to destroy him. There's a difference." As they sat in Philadelphia's historic downtown, celebrating academic achievement that masked careful preparation for corporate warfare, none of them could have predicted that within 3 years, Nashville's business community would witness a confrontation that would prove family bonds forged by love could be stronger than any empire built on ruthless ambition. But first, Lavinia Freeman Cole had to establish herself as someone Pearlie Hawkins would desperately need, even as she remained completely invisible to the man who had thrown her away before she drew her first breath. Chapter 7. Rise of the Predator. Nashville, Tennessee, 2021 to 2023. The most dangerous predators are those who earn their prey's gratitude before revealing their true nature. Nashville First National Bank occupied a gleaming tower in the heart of downtown, its glass and steel facade reflecting the city's transformation from country music capital to diversified financial hub. On a humid June morning in 2021, 21-year-old Lavinia Freeman Cole walked through the lobby's marble expanse carrying a Wharton MBA, 4 years of strategic preparation, and a plan so precisely calibrated it would have impressed Sun Tzu himself. "Welcome to Nashville First National," said Margaret Blackwood, Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending, extending a manicured hand to the young woman who had impressed the hiring committee with academic credentials that bordered on supernatural. "We're excited to have you join our team." Lavinia's handshake conveyed exactly the right balance of confidence and respect, firm enough to suggest competence, brief enough to show deference to hierarchy. Her appearance had been calculated with military precision, conservative navy suit that suggested seriousness without severity, minimal jewelry that indicated professionalism rather than ostentation, and a smile warm enough to put clients at ease while revealing nothing of her interior landscape. "Thank you for this opportunity," she replied with the earnest enthusiasm expected from recent graduates entering their dream careers. "I'm eager to contribute to Nashville's business community." What Margaret Blackwood couldn't have known was that Lavinia had spent months researching Nashville First National's client roster, competitive position, and strategic objectives before accepting their offer. She'd chosen this institution not for its prestige or salary package, but because it occupied a unique position in Nashville's financial ecosystem, large enough to handle significant transactions, but agile enough to compete with the major regional banks that dominated Tennessee's commercial lending market. Her first assignment involved analyzing loan applications for small businesses seeking expansion capital. While her colleagues viewed this as routine entry-level work, Lavinia approached each file as if it contained state secrets requiring careful evaluation. She studied financial statements with forensic attention, researched market conditions that might affect repayment capacity, and most importantly, investigated which businesses had been targeted by Hawkins Entertainment's acquisition strategies. "Freeman has an unusual approach to credit analysis," observed James Morrison, a veteran loan officer who had mentored dozens of junior staff members. "Most new hires focus on standard metrics, cash flow, debt-to-equity ratios, collateral values. But she seems to understand how external market forces could affect long-term viability." What Morrison didn't realize was that Lavinia possessed intimate knowledge of one particular external force that had devastated Nashville's small business landscape for 2 decades. Through her research, she had identified 17 family-owned companies that Pearlie had acquired, stripped of assets, and discarded like empty shells. Each case study taught her more about his methods, his timing, and most importantly, his vulnerabilities. By her second year at Nashville First National, Lavinia had earned a reputation as someone who could salvage loan relationships that other officers considered hopeless. Her specialty became businesses facing hostile acquisition attempts, companies whose owners needed creative financing solutions to maintain independence against well-funded corporate predators. "Miss Freeman," said David Chen, owner of Chen Music Distribution, during a particularly tense loan negotiation in late 2022. "I don't understand how you knew exactly what kind of financing structure would protect us from Hawkins Entertainment's buyout attempt. Their lawyers said our debt covenants would make acquisition impossible, but you anticipated their strategy perfectly." Lavinia's expression remained professionally neutral, though satisfaction burned in her chest like carefully banked coals. "I've studied acquisition patterns in Nashville's music industry extensively," she replied. "Predatory buyers often use similar tactics, so defending against them requires understanding their playbook." What she didn't mention was that she had spent countless hours analyzing Pearlie's previous acquisitions, identifying the financial vulnerabilities he exploited to force sales from reluctant owners. By structuring defensive loan packages that eliminated those vulnerabilities, she could effectively shield potential targets from his standard acquisition methods. Her success rate with troubled loans became legendary within Tennessee's banking community. Nashville Business Journal featured her in a cover story titled "The Miracle Worker: How One Banker is Saving Nashville's Family Businesses." The article described several spectacular turnarounds where Lavinia's intervention had transformed failing companies into profitable enterprises. But careful readers might have noticed that many of these businesses had been previously targeted by the same mysterious corporate acquirer. "Freeman's approach is revolutionary," explained Dr. Patricia Williams, a business professor at Vanderbilt's Owen Graduate School of Management, in the article's conclusion. "She doesn't just evaluate creditworthiness, she anticipates competitive threats and structures financing to neutralize them. It's like she can predict the future." By late 2023, at age 24, Lavinia had been promoted to Assistant Vice President of Commercial Banking, making her one of the youngest officers in Nashville First National's history. Her promotion to full vice president was scheduled for early 2025, but her influence already extended far beyond her official title. Her corner office provided panoramic views of the city where she'd been born during a blizzard, grown up in modest comfort, and was now positioning herself for the confrontation that had driven every decision since her 10th birthday. The promotion ceremony was attended by Freeman and Temperance, who sat in the bank's elegant boardroom, watching their daughter receive congratulations from Nashville's business elite while struggling to recognize the loving child they'd raised. Success had transformed Lavinia into someone polished and powerful, but also remote in ways that worried them both. "I'm so proud of what you've accomplished," Freeman said during their celebration dinner at Nashville's most exclusive restaurant. "But I miss the little girl who used to help me make breakfast on Sunday mornings." "She's still here, Daddy Freeman," Lavinia replied, her voice softening with genuine affection for the man who had chosen to be her father. "She's just focused on achieving something important." "What exactly are you trying to achieve?" Temperance asked quietly. "You've proven yourself professionally, earned respect throughout Nashville's business community, and built a successful career that any parent would admire. When does it become enough?" Lavinia's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, revealing glimpses of the steel that had been forging itself for 13 years. "It becomes enough when he realizes what he threw away, when he understands that the daughter he called worthless became someone he desperately needs." Her parents exchanged worried glances across the candle-lit table, recognizing that their brilliant, accomplished daughter was still that 10-year-old child whose heart had been broken by learning about her father's rejection. Success hadn't healed that wound. It had simply given her more sophisticated tools for inflicting equivalent damage. Meanwhile, across Nashville in his Belmead mansion, Pearlie Hawkins remained blissfully unaware that the banking officer whose defensive loan strategies had begun frustrating his acquisition plans was the same baby girl he'd thrown into a December storm 23 years earlier. His empire continued operating according to methods that had proven successful for decades, but small cracks were beginning to appear in the foundation. cracks that a patient predator had been carefully creating through strategic intervention. The final phase of Lavinia's plan required one crucial element, an opportunity to position herself as Pearlie's only salvation when his empire faced existential threat. And as 2024 approached with industry changes that would challenge traditional music industry models, that opportunity was beginning to take shape like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. In her private journal, kept locked in her apartment's home safe, Lavinia wrote her final entry for 2024. Patience is everything. He values power and image above all else. Soon, I'll become something he desperately needs. And when that moment arrives, I'll finally be able to show him exactly what he discarded. Chapter 8. The Trap Closes. Nashville, Tennessee, 2024. The most exquisite traps are those that feel like salvation until the moment they spring shut. The music industry's unexpected downturn began with subtle shifts that only the most astute observers recognized as harbingers of larger disruption. Streaming revenues, which had sustained steady growth for nearly a decade, plateaued as consumers reached subscription saturation. Younger demographics migrated toward short-form content platforms that monetized attention rather than artistry. Most significantly, independent artists increasingly bypassed traditional record labels entirely, using social media platforms to build direct relationships with audiences. For most music industry executives, these changes represented manageable challenges requiring strategic adaptation. For Pearlie Hawkins, whose empire had been built on acquiring traditional music companies rather than innovating new business models, they represented existential threats to everything he had spent 25 years constructing. Sitting in his mahogany-paneled Belmead office, surrounded by gold records that testified to past conquests, 59-year-old Pearlie studied financial reports with growing alarm. His grey hair had silvered completely since abandoning his pregnant wife, and success had added distinguished weight to his frame, but his predatory instincts remained as sharp as ever, sharp enough to recognize when he had become prey. The Nashville Sound Studios acquisition is hemorrhaging money, reported his chief financial officer Marcus Webb, delivering quarterly results with the grim efficiency of a coroner conducting autopsies. We paid $42 million for a recording facility that's now worth perhaps $15 million in current market conditions. Independent artists prefer home recording setups, and major labels are consolidating their studio operations. 3 more acquisitions told similar stories of spectacular miscalculation. Hawkins Entertainment had built its fortune by identifying undervalued music industry assets, but Pearlie's instincts had failed to anticipate how rapidly digital transformation would render traditional infrastructure obsolete. Companies he'd acquired for their physical assets, recording studios, distribution centers, manufacturing facilities, had become expensive anchors, dragging down his empire's overall performance. "How much additional capital do we need to stabilize operations?" Pearlie asked, though he already suspected the answer would be devastating. "Minimum of $60 million to service debt obligations and fund necessary restructuring," Webb replied. "Maximum of $120 million if we want to pivot toward digital platforms and compete effectively in the new landscape." The numbers hung in the air like death sentences. For the first time in his career, Pearlie Hawkins, the man who had built a $60 million empire through ruthless ambition and perfect timing, needed external financing to survive. His first instinct was to approach the major regional banks that had previously competed for his business. But during initial conversations, he encountered unexpected resistance that puzzled someone accustomed to being courted by financial institutions eager to participate in his success. "First Tennessee is concerned about your debt-to-equity ratios and cash flow projections," explained Jennifer Walsh, the senior commercial banker who had previously approved millions in credit facilities for Hawkins Entertainment. Given current market volatility and your company's leverage metrics, we're not comfortable with the exposure levels your financing needs would require. Your EBITDA coverage ratios have fallen below our institutional minimums. Similar conversations with Regions Bank, SunTrust, and other major lenders yielded identical results: polite appreciation for his past relationship, professional acknowledgement of his track record, but firm reluctance to provide the capital he desperately needed. What Pearlie couldn't have known was that each bank's decision had been influenced by carefully coordinated intelligence about his empire's vulnerabilities. Anonymous market analyses appeared in industry publications, highlighting structural weaknesses in traditional music industry business models. Detailed financial projections circulated among commercial lending committees, suggesting that companies like Hawkins Entertainment represented unacceptable risks in rapidly changing market conditions. The source of these strategically timed analyses would have been impossible to trace, but they all shared certain characteristics: sophisticated understanding of music industry dynamics, intimate knowledge of Hawkins Entertainment's specific vulnerabilities, and recommendations that traditional lenders avoid exposure to legacy entertainment conglomerates facing digital disruption. By October 2024, with debt service obligations mounting and cash flow deteriorating, Pearlie's options had narrowed to a handful of smaller institutions that might be willing to consider high-risk, high-reward financing packages. At the top of that list was Nashville First National Bank, whose reputation for creative lending solutions and successful track record with troubled companies made them his most promising prospect. Nashville First National has an unusual officer named Freeman, reported his business development director during their final strategy meeting. She's young, but she's built a reputation for salvaging loans that other banks consider hopeless. If anyone can structure financing for our situation, it's probably her. The irony of seeking salvation from someone named Freeman would have been devastating if Pearlie had possessed any memory of the pregnant wife he'd thrown into a December storm 24 years earlier. But abandonment, like most casual cruelties, had faded from his consciousness while remaining permanently etched in the memories of those who survived it. Lavinia Freeman Cole, now Assistant Vice President at Nashville First National, received Hawkins Entertainment's loan application on a Tuesday morning in early November. The file landed on her desk with the weight of destiny: 60 pages of audited financial statements, detailed business projections, and comprehensive collateral documentation that represented the culmination of years of patient preparation. She studied the documents with clinical precision, though her pulse quickened with anticipation that had nothing to do with professional evaluation. Every number told stories she already knew: the failed acquisitions, the over-leveraged capital structure, the desperate need for external financing to prevent corporate collapse. But most importantly, the application revealed something that made her heart sing with vindictive joy. Pearlie Hawkins, the man who had called daughters worthless, was now completely dependent on a daughter's decision for his empire's survival. "Margaret," she said to her department head during their weekly review meeting, "I've received an interesting application from Hawkins Entertainment. They're seeking substantial financing for restructuring and digital transformation. The risk profile is significant, but the potential for a successful turnaround could be substantial if handled correctly." Margaret Blackwood studied the file with professional interest. "Pearlie Hawkins has quite a reputation in Nashville business circles. Some people consider him brilliant, others think he's ruthless. What's your initial assessment?" "I think he's a relic from an earlier era who failed to adapt to changing market conditions," Lavinia replied, with perfectly neutral professionalism. "But that might make him desperate enough to accept terms that protect our institution's interests." The loan committee meeting was scheduled for December 10th, with final approval contingent on a formal presentation by Hawkins Entertainment's management team. But Lavinia had a different idea, one that would transform a routine banking transaction into something far more personally satisfying. "I'd like to schedule the presentation for December 15th, she announced, her voice betraying nothing of the significance that date held. "It's my birthday, and I'd like to give myself the gift of a challenging professional decision." Her colleagues agreed without question. Senior Vice President Freeman had earned the right to schedule important meetings according to her preferences. None of them could have imagined that they were helping orchestrate a confrontation that would prove the most powerful empires could be destroyed by the very people they had discarded as worthless. That evening, sitting in her downtown apartment overlooking the Cumberland River, Lavinia called her parents with news that made them both proud and terrified. "He came to me," she told Freeman and Temperance, her voice carrying quiet satisfaction that chilled them both. "After 24 years, Pearlie Hawkins needs something from the daughter he threw away. And on December 15th, exactly 25 years after I was born, he's going to learn exactly what he lost." "Are you sure about this path, sweetheart?" Freeman asked gently. "Once you reveal who you are, there's no going back. This confrontation will change you in ways you might not anticipate." "I've been changed since I was 10 years old, Daddy Freeman," Lavinia replied with steel-edged certainty. "This doesn't change me, this completes me." As Nashville prepared for another winter, few people could have predicted that the city's business community was about to witness a reckoning that would prove blood may be thicker than water, but chosen family forged by love was stronger than any empire built on ruthless ambition. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Nashville First National Bank, December 15th, 2024. There are moments when history holds its breath, when the universe pauses to witness justice served with the precision of surgical instruments and the power of thunderstorms. The boardroom within Nashville First National Bank had been carefully prepared for the most important loan presentation of Lavinia's career. What should have been a standard commercial lending meeting had drawn unusual attention. 50 of Nashville's key business leaders, select media representatives, and banking officials filled the executive conference room. Lavinia had personally invited these influential observers, explaining that Hawkins Entertainment's restructuring would significantly impact Tennessee's music industry landscape. At precisely 11 o'clock on the morning that marked exactly 25 years since a baby girl had entered the world during a December blizzard, Pearlie Hawkins arrived with an entourage that spoke to his remaining influence despite mounting financial pressures. His current wife, Catalin Kelsey, the same woman who had divorced him decades earlier, only to remarry him during his peak success years, clung to his arm with the desperation of someone whose lifestyle depended on his continued prosperity. His legal team, consisting of Nashville's most expensive corporate attorneys, flanked him with briefcases full of contracts and contingency plans. "Quite a production for a loan approval presentation," observed Richard Morrison, CEO of Tennessee's largest investment firm, to his companion as they found their seats. "Freeman Cole must be planning something significant." Indeed she was. Backstage, in a small preparation room that normally housed bank employees reviewing presentation materials, 24-year-old Lavinia Freeman Cole studied herself in a full-length mirror with the intensity of a general preparing for the most crucial battle of a long campaign. Her navy suit had been chosen for its conservative elegance, her jewelry minimal but expensive, her makeup flawless but understated. She looked every inch the successful banking executive she had become, professional, competent, trustworthy. But behind her carefully composed exterior, emotions churned with volcanic intensity. This morning represented the culmination of years of strategic preparation, 4 years of Wharton education, 3 years of building her banking reputation, and most importantly, 25 years of living with the knowledge that her biological father had considered her worthless before she drew her first breath. A soft knock interrupted her final preparations. "Come in," she called, though she already knew who would be standing in the doorway. Freeman Cole, now 64 years old and distinguished by the silver hair that made him look like a professor emeritus, entered with Temperance beside him. At 47, her mother had aged gracefully into the kind of serene beauty that came from being genuinely loved for more than 2 decades. Both wore expressions that mixed pride with deep concern. They understood that their daughter was about to cross a threshold from which there would be no return. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Freeman asked, though his experienced banker's eyes could already read the answer in her posture and expression. "Like I've been preparing for this moment my entire life," Lavinia replied, embracing the man who had chosen to be her father when her biological parent had chosen abandonment. "Thank you for being here. Thank you for everything you've given me." "We'll be in the front row," Temperance said softly, kissing her daughter's cheek with the gentleness of someone blessing a warrior heading into battle. "Whatever happens today, remember that you are loved completely, unconditionally, and permanently." As her parents took their seats among the distinguished audience, Lavinia walked onto the stage with the confidence of someone who had been born for this exact moment. The auditorium fell silent as she approached the podium, her presence commanding attention despite her youth. From his seat in the third row, Pearlie Hawkins studied the young woman who held his empire's fate in her hands with the analytical precision that had made him successful for 3 decades. She was attractive in an understated way, clearly intelligent, and possessed the kind of professional bearing that suggested competence beyond her years, but nothing about her triggered even the faintest recognition of the baby he had rejected 25 years earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lavinia began, her voice carrying easily through the professionally equipped sound system, "thank you for joining us today for what I hope will be an enlightening discussion about family, legacy, and the true meaning of success." The opening statement caused subtle shifts throughout the audience. This didn't sound like typical banking presentation language, and several attendees exchanged puzzled glances. "Today, I want to tell you about 2 fathers," Lavinia continued, her gaze moving across the crowd until it found Freeman and Temperance in the front row. "One who abandoned his family and one who saved them." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as everyone recognized that they were witnessing something far more personal than a routine business presentation. 25 years ago today, exactly 25 years ago, a wealthy businessman learned that his wife was pregnant with a daughter. Most fathers would have felt joy at such news. This man felt rage. Pearlie's complexion began shifting from its normal healthy tan towards something approaching pale grey, though he hadn't yet made the connection that would shatter his world. You see, this businessman had convinced himself that only sons could carry on his legacy. Only boys deserved his love, his pride, his investment in their future. A daughter, in his twisted worldview, was worse than worthless. She was a mockery of his ambitions. Lavinia's voice grew stronger with each word, fed by decades of suppressed pain and crystalline purpose. So when he learned that his wife carried a daughter, he did what weak, cruel men do when they don't get exactly what they demand. He threw his pregnant wife out into a December storm, calling her worthless, saying she had failed him. The audience sat in stunned silence, recognizing they were witnessing something unprecedented in Nashville's business community. This wasn't a banking presentation, this was a public reckoning. That woman, my mother, stumbled through freezing rain with nowhere to go. She collapsed at a downtown bus stop, abandoned by the man who had promised to love her, 8 months pregnant and hypothermic. Lavinia's eyes found her parents, and her voice softened with overwhelming love. But then a miracle happened. A real man found her. Freeman's eyes filled with tears as he realized what his daughter was doing, not just exposing Pearlie's cruelty, but celebrating the love that had saved them both. Freeman Cole didn't know this desperate woman, but he saw someone in need. He took her home, cared for her, protected her, and when I was born during the worst blizzard Nashville had seen in decades, he made a promise that changed all our lives. Her voice broke slightly with emotion, but she continued with unwavering strength. He promised I would never know abandonment. He promised I would grow up knowing I was valued, cherished, and worthy of unconditional love. The auditorium was completely silent, except for the soft sounds of people crying, hardened business executives moved by witnessing pure familial devotion. That man became my real father, not through blood but through choice. Every single day for 24 years, he chose to love me. When I took my first steps, he cheered. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, he cried with pride. When I succeeded in my career, he celebrated like I had given him the world. She looked directly at Freeman, her voice filled with fierce gratitude. He taught me that daughters aren't investments to be calculated or disappointments to be discarded. He showed me that real fathers see daughters as treasures to be protected and dreams to be nurtured. The audience erupted in thunderous applause, but Lavinia held up her hand for silence. The most important part was yet to come. "The man who made that decision is present today," she said, her professional composure masking the emotional significance of this moment. "Mr. Hawkins, your loan application raises important questions about institutional values and fiduciary responsibility to our community." Pearlie's face had gone completely white as recognition finally dawned. The baby he had discarded, the pregnancy he had rejected, had grown into the woman who now held his empire's survival in her hands. "You wanted a son to inherit your legacy," Lavinia said, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium with devastating clarity, "but you threw away a daughter who built her own empire. You thought family meant ownership, but Freeman Cole taught me that family means love. You calculated my worth and found me lacking, but he saw treasures where you saw disappointment." The audience rose to their feet in spontaneous ovation, the sound rolling through the auditorium like thunder. Business leaders who had spent decades in Nashville's competitive environment stood applauding not a banking presentation, but a testament to the power of chosen family over biological obligation. Freeman Cole stood with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, applauding his daughter with hands that shook from overwhelming pride. When Lavinia saw him standing there, this man who had saved her mother and chosen to love them both, she stepped away from the podium and walked toward him. The audience watched in complete silence as Freeman climbed onto the stage and embraced the daughter he had raised with such devotion. "I am so proud to be your father," he said into the microphone, his voice breaking with emotion. "You are everything I ever dreamed a daughter could be." There wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium as father and daughter held each other, proving that love built through daily choices was stronger than any connection based merely on shared DNA. The moment stretched through eternity and seconds simultaneously, witnessed by Nashville's power structure as testimony to what families could become when built on foundations of genuine devotion. When they separated, Lavinia returned to the podium for the final act of her carefully orchestrated drama. "Based on our comprehensive review of your application, Mr. Hawkins," Lavinia's voice carried across the silent boardroom with professional authority, "Nashville First National cannot approve financing for Hawkins Entertainment. We cannot in good conscience support an enterprise led by someone whose personal character demonstrates such profound disregard for family obligations and moral responsibility." The room erupted as business leaders realized they had witnessed not only a personal revelation, but a legitimate banking decision based on character assessment. "You wanted a son to inherit your legacy?" Lavinia's final words rang through the auditorium with prophetic finality. "Your legacy dies with you. The daughter you threw away just became your judge." As Pearlie Hawkins sat frozen in his seat, his face grey with shock, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. His abandoned daughter stood triumphant on the stage, surrounded by applause from everyone who mattered in Tennessee business. The man who had built an empire on the belief that only sons had value had just learned that the daughter he'd discarded possessed more power than any heir he might have imagined. And in that moment of perfect justice, witnessed by Nashville's elite, family bonds forged by love proved stronger than any empire built on pride and cruelty. Chapter 10. The Complete Destruction, Nashville and Beyond, December 2024, August 2025. The mightiest empires crumble not through external conquest, but when their foundations prove to have been built on moral quicksand that can no longer support the weight of accumulated sins. Within 15 minutes of Lavinia's public revelation, every smartphone in Nashville First National Bank's auditorium had captured and transmitted footage of the most devastating business confrontation in Tennessee's modern history. By noon, the Nashville daughter was trending nationally as video clips spread across social media platforms with the viral intensity reserved for moments that perfectly crystallize universal truths about power, family, and justice. CNN's business correspondent, reporting live from outside the bank, summarized what millions of viewers were discovering. What began as a routine loan presentation has become a story that's captivating America. A daughter's revenge 25 years in the making, revealing how a Nashville music mogul's cruelty toward his own family has finally come back to destroy everything he built. Inside the auditorium, Pearlie Hawkins sat paralyzed in his burgundy velvet seat, while Nashville's business elite filed past him with expressions ranging from horror to satisfaction. Many had suffered under his ruthless acquisition tactics over the years, and witnessing his public humiliation provided a form of cosmic justice that felt long overdue. "Pearlie," his wife Catelyn whispered urgently, "we need to leave. Now the cameras—" But he remained frozen, staring at the empty stage where his abandoned daughter had just pronounced judgment on everything he'd spent 60 years constructing. The baby he'd thrown away had grown into someone with the power to destroy him, and she had wielded that power with surgical precision that left no room for recovery or appeal. Margaret Blackwood, Nashville First National's senior vice president, approached their row with professional courtesy that barely concealed her own shock at witnessing her colleague's extraordinary revelation. "Mr. Hawkins," she said quietly, "perhaps it would be best if you and your party used our private exit to avoid the media attention." The media attention had grown into a feeding frenzy. News vans surrounded the building, reporters thrust microphones toward anyone emerging from the presentation, and Nashville's business community buzzed with speculation about how Pearlie's empire would survive this unprecedented public relations catastrophe. By evening, the story had achieved national prominence. Cable news networks devoted extensive coverage to the Nashville daughter story, featuring child psychology experts discussing the long-term effects of parental rejection, business analysts examining how personal scandals could destroy corporate reputations, and family therapists exploring the difference between biological and chosen family bonds. "This case illustrates something we see repeatedly in family trauma research," explained Dr. Sarah Martinez, a nationally recognized expert in childhood abandonment, during her CNN interview. "Children who experience parental rejection often spend their entire lives either seeking approval from the rejecting parent or, in cases like this, methodically planning to prove their worth through devastating confrontation. But the most damaging coverage came from investigative journalists who began examining Hawkins Entertainment's business practices with renewed scrutiny. Armed with public interest generated by Lavinia's revelation, reporters uncovered decades of ruthless acquisition tactics, employee exploitation, and community devastation that had previously escaped widespread attention. The Nashville Scene published a comprehensive exposé titled "The Emperor's Empire: How Pearlie Hawkins Built Success on the Ruins of Family Businesses." The article featured interviews with former employees who described pension fund raids, sudden layoffs, and corporate cultures destroyed by profit-maximizing strategies that prioritized shareholder value over human dignity. He treated entire companies like disposable assets, explained Martha Richardson, former office manager at Harmony Records before Hawkins Entertainment's acquisition. Family businesses that had operated successfully for generations were dismantled within months. He didn't just buy companies, he destroyed them for parts. More devastating than media coverage was the immediate business impact of Pearlie's public humiliation. Corporate partners who had maintained profitable relationships with Hawkins Entertainment suddenly developed concerns about associating with someone whose personal character had been so dramatically exposed. Distribution agreements were quietly terminated, joint ventures dissolved, and strategic partnerships abandoned with explanations that cited evolving business priorities rather than acknowledging the obvious truth. Reputational risk has become the primary factor in commercial relationships, explained James Wheeler, a crisis management consultant, in his analysis for Forbes magazine. Companies can't afford to be associated with someone who abandoned a pregnant wife, regardless of their historical profitability. Within 6 months, Hawkins Entertainment's carefully constructed empire had collapsed through a combination of factors: inability to secure necessary financing, mounting debt obligations, and the reputational damage that made business partners increasingly reluctant to maintain relationships. The public revelation had simply accelerated financial pressures that were already threatening the company's stability. Recording studios were liquidated at fire sale prices, office buildings sold to satisfy creditor demands, and his carefully curated art collection auctioned to cover operational expenses. The personal toll proved even more devastating than financial destruction. Kathleen Kelsey, horrified to discover she had remarried a man capable of such cruelty toward his own family, filed for divorce within weeks of the public revelation. Her attorney's statement to the media emphasized that she had been completely unaware of Mr. Hawkins' abandonment of his pregnant wife, and had she known such information, would never have entered into marriage with someone capable of such unconscionable behavior. Nashville's social circles, which had once competed for invitations to Bellmead dinner parties, now treated Pearlie as a pariah whose presence could contaminate their own reputations. Country club memberships were quietly revoked, charity board positions rescinded, and invitations to galas and fundraisers stopped arriving at his increasingly empty mansion. The isolation destroyed him more thoroughly than financial losses. Pearlie had built his identity around commanding respect and admiration from Nashville's power structure, but overnight he had become someone people crossed the street to avoid. Former associates who had once courted his favor now refused his phone calls, and business meetings that might have salvaged portions of his empire never materialized because no one wanted to be photographed in his company. His health, which had remained robust throughout decades of high-stress business warfare, deteriorated rapidly under the combined pressure of financial ruin and social ostracism. Chronic insomnia left him gaunt and hollow-eyed. High blood pressure medication couldn't control the hypertension caused by constant stress, and his once commanding physical presence diminished into something that resembled a haunted scarecrow. 6 months after Lavinia's public confrontation, on a humid February evening in 2025, Pearlie Hawkins suffered a massive heart attack while sitting alone in his Bellmead mansion. The paramedics who responded to the automatic alarm system found him collapsed in his empty office, surrounded by the remnants of awards and accolades from an empire that no longer existed. He died as he had chosen to live, alone, unloved, and forgotten by everyone who might have mourned his passing. The obituary in the Tennessean was brief and factual. Pearlie Hawkins, 60, former owner of Hawkins Entertainment, died February 15, 2025, at Vanderbilt Medical Center following cardiac arrest. He is survived by no immediate family members. Private services were held at Woodlawn Memorial Park. Lavinia did not attend the funeral, though she sent a modest floral arrangement with a card that read simply, "From the daughter you never knew." The gesture was witnessed by no one except the funeral director, who later told his wife that he'd never seen anything more heartbreaking than flowers sent by a child to the parent who had abandoned her. 6 months later, in August 2025, Nashville had largely forgotten about the rise and fall of Pearlie Hawkins. His former empire had been absorbed by more ethical competitors, his Belmead mansion purchased by a tech entrepreneur who appreciated its architecture while remaining ignorant of its tragic history, and his grave marker bore no visitors except for groundskeepers who maintained the cemetery's landscaping. But in a modest Green Hills home that had become synonymous with love and chosen family, 3 generations gathered around the same kitchen table where Freeman had once fed a desperate pregnant woman and her newborn daughter. The August afternoon sunshine streamed through windows that had witnessed more genuine happiness than mansions worth 50 times their value. "Dad," Lavinia said, using the title that meant everything to both of them, "we have an announcement." At 65, Freeman Cole had aged into the kind of distinguished gentleman that suggested wisdom earned through decades of choosing kindness over convenience. His hair was completely silver now. His hands showed the gentle weathering of a man who had spent 45 years helping others achieve their dreams through careful banking advice. But his eyes still held the same warmth that had saved 2 lives during a long-ago December storm. Temperance, at 48, radiated the serene beauty of someone who had survived trauma and emerged stronger rather than bitter. Her honey-colored hair now showed silver threads that Freeman claimed made her more beautiful than ever, and her Tennessee whiskey eyes still sparkled with the intelligence that had first attracted a younger, crueler man who had never deserved her love. "What kind of announcement?" Freeman asked, though his experienced father's intuition had already provided the answer. Lavinia exchanged glances with her husband Marcus, a gentle high school English teacher she had met while volunteering at the same literacy center where Freeman still donated his Wednesday evenings. Their courtship had been built on shared values rather than strategic advantage, and their marriage represented everything her biological parents' relationship had failed to become. "You're going to be a grandfather," Lavinia said, her hand moving instinctively to her barely visible belly. "Due in June." Freeman's eyes filled with tears of pure joy, the same expression he'd worn 25 years earlier when tiny fingers had first grasped his index finger in a hospital delivery room. "Boy or girl?" he asked. "Does it matter?" Lavinia replied with a smile that held no shadows, no hidden agendas, no calculations of worth or disappointment. "Not one bit," Freeman whispered, pulling his daughter into an embrace that encompassed 3 generations of chosen love. "This baby will be cherished completely no matter what." Through the kitchen window, August sunshine illuminated Nashville's familiar skyline, the same city where a pregnant woman had once been thrown into a storm, where a newborn's cries had announced her arrival during a blizzard, where a daughter's revenge had proven that love was stronger than any empire built on cruelty. And in a cold, lonely grave at Woodlawn Memorial Park, Pearlie Hawkins rested knowing he had thrown away life's greatest treasure, a daughter's love, for the illusion of control over a legacy that had died with him. But inside a warm kitchen filled with laughter and upcoming grandparent preparations, that daughter had built something far more valuable than any business empire. A family bound by daily choices to love, protect, and celebrate each other, regardless of gender, genetics, or society's expectations. The daughter who had been called worthless had proven herself priceless, not through revenge, but through her capacity to create the very love she had been denied.